Luka Voss was absolutely, categorically certain that diplomatic dinners were designed by sadists. He'd been sitting at the crystalline table for 2 hours, listening to speeches about trade agreements and cultural exchange, while trying to figure out which of the 7 utensils in front of him was for the luminescent vegetable thing on his plate. His supervisor, Marin, was supposed to be here. Marin spoke 4 languages, understood complex social hierarchies, and could make small talk about infrastructure development without making it sound like a lecture on load-bearing calculations. Luka was an engineer. He built things. He did not do this. The human delegation honors us with their presence, someone said in melodious Aranthi, the translation implant behind Luka's ear rendering it into slightly formal English. Luka smiled and nodded, which seemed to be the acceptable response to most things tonight. Around him, the Aranthi nobility maintained perfect posture in their flowing robes, their elongated ears adorned with delicate jewelry that caught the light from the floating luminaries overhead. At the head of the table sat Queen Seravine, radiating the kind of authority that made Luka want to check if his shirt was tucked in. Beside the queen sat a young girl, her daughter Kiora, according to the briefing. Maybe 8 years old by human standards, with the same elegant ears as her mother and eyes that sparkled with barely contained energy. She was picking at her food with the universal expression of a child enduring something incredibly boring. Luka sympathized. The speeches continued. Something about the mutual benefits of the terraforming project Luka's company was managing on Arantha's southern continent. Something about historical ties and future cooperation. Luka's mind drifted to the structural reinforcement schedule for the palace's east wing, which was behind by 3 weeks because of material delays. He noticed Kiora slip away from the table. None of the adults seemed to register it, or maybe they were too polite to acknowledge a child's restlessness during important diplomatic proceedings. She drifted toward the garden terrace, drawn by the night-blooming flowers that released bioluminescent pollen into the air. Luka glanced at the terrace and felt his engineer's instinct kick into high alert. The terrace was part of the East Wing renovation. The decorative archway over the entrance was original construction, beautiful, ornate, and according to his team's assessment, structurally compromised by centuries of weight and inadequate support. They'd flagged it for replacement next week. Kiora walked directly toward it, reaching up to touch the glowing flowers climbing the ancient stone. Luka saw the crack forming before his conscious mind registered what it meant. A hairline fracture in the keystone, spreading with the inevitability of physics and time. The entire arch was about to collapse, and Kiora was standing directly beneath it. He didn't think. Thinking was for later, for when you had time to calculate load distribution and failure points. He moved, his chair clattering backward as he launched himself across the terrace. 3 steps. The crack widened. Structural integrity at critical failure. 4 steps. He could hear the stone beginning to groan, tons of ornamental masonry losing its centuries-long battle with gravity. Luka grabbed Kiora around the waist, felt her startled gasp against his shoulder, and twisted his body between her and the collapsing archway. The impact was everything his engineering background told him it would be. Catastrophic, total, and excruciatingly painful. Stone hammered into his back and shoulders with the weight of historical architecture and poor maintenance schedules. He felt something in his spine give way, heard his arm break with a sound like snapping wood, and tasted blood from where he'd bitten through his lip. But Kiora was screaming, which meant she was breathing, which meant he'd gotten his body between her and the worst of it. The darkness rushing in around his vision felt almost gentle compared to the pain. Consciousness returned in pieces, none of them pleasant. Luka registered pain first, comprehensive, enthusiastic pain that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Then sound. Shouting in Aranthi, the clatter of boots on stone, someone crying. Then sensation. He was lying on something hard and cold, and there was definitely blood pooling beneath him because he could feel it soaking through his formal jacket. "Kiora," he tried to say, but it came out as a rasp. The crying got louder, a child's voice, high and terrified but definitely alive. Luka's chest loosened fractionally. "Worth it. Get the medical team now." That was Queen Seravine's voice, sharp with command. "Move the debris carefully. He may have spinal damage. Someone get my daughter away from here." "No," Kiora's voice, stubborn through tears. "He saved me. I won't leave him." Luka tried to open his eyes. His left one cooperated. His right seemed to have encountered some blood and given up. Through his blurred vision, he could see boots, guards in formal armor, nobles in silk shoes, someone in medical whites running across the terrace. Then everything went silent. Not the natural quiet of people stopping to listen, but a silence so complete it felt like the universe had paused mid-breath. The boots stopped moving. Even the crying stopped. Through his functioning eye, Luka saw Queen Seravine approach. She moved with deliberate grace, each step measured and formal. Her robes whispered against the stone. The crown on her head, delicate metalwork studded with gems that pulsed with their own light, caught the luminary's glow. She stopped beside him, and then impossibly she began to sink downward. Not crouch, not bend to inspect his injuries. She knelt, her knees touching the blood-soaked stone, her formal robes pooling around her like spilled water. Her spine remained straight, her head bowed forward until her forehead nearly touched the ground beside Luka's broken body. Someone gasped. It sounded like they'd been stabbed. An elderly advisor made a choking sound. "Your Majesty, you cannot." "I can and I will." Seravine's voice carried absolute authority even while she knelt. Her hand, trembling slightly despite her controlled tone, reached out and touched Luka's face with impossible gentleness. "He placed his life before my daughter's, before my heir, before the continuation of my entire line." Luka tried to speak, to tell her this wasn't necessary, that he just reacted on instinct and really didn't need whatever formal thing was happening here. What came out was, "Is she okay?" Seravine's breath caught. Her fingers on his face trembled harder. "She lives because you were willing to die. That invokes bonds older than my crown." The medical team stood frozen at the edge of the terrace, clearly wanting to rush forward but apparently unable to move while the queen knelt. Luka's vision was starting to blur worse, darkness creeping in from the edges. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said carefully, "the human needs immediate medical attention." Waking up in the Royal Medical Facility was a surreal experience involving a lot of very concerned Aranthi doctors, several pieces of monitoring equipment that beeped in harmonious patterns, and enough pain medication to make Luka wonder if he'd hallucinated the entire dinner. "Am I dead?" he asked the ceiling, which was painted with some sort of mural involving constellations and geometric patterns. "No," said a voice beside him, "though you tried admirably." Luka turned his head, slowly, because everything hurt, to find an elderly Aranthi man sitting in a chair beside his bed. The man had silver threading through his dark hair, robes that suggested academic rather than noble status, and an expression of profound concern. "I'm Torvin," the man said, "scholar of historical protocols and currently the person tasked with explaining to you exactly what you've done. Saved a kid from falling rocks." Luka's voice came out raspy. "Pretty sure that one's self-explanatory." "The action, yes. The consequences, no." Torvin pulled his chair closer. "Tell me, Luka Voss, what do you know about Aranthi cultural hierarchy?" There's a queen, she's in charge." "Don't insult people or start wars." That's about the extent of my briefing retention. Torvin made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "I'll start with the relevant part. In Aranthi culture, the monarch kneels before no one. Not foreign dignitaries, not religious figures, not even our gods. To kneel is to acknowledge someone as your superior in the cosmic order, to place yourself in debt so complete that your own authority becomes secondary to that obligation." Luka's pain-fogged brain took a moment to process that. The queen knelt. I saw her, or I hallucinated her. You did not hallucinate. Queen Seravine knelt before you in front of the entire court and invoked the Sev'rathi, the life debt beyond law. She has declared you sacred, someone whose life she values above her own position and, by extension, above the state itself. That seems excessive, Luka said weakly. I just didn't want a kid to get crushed by bad architecture. Torvin leaned forward. That selflessness is precisely why the gesture carries such weight. You didn't calculate political advantage. You didn't consider the implications of saving the heir to the throne. You simply chose her life over your own safety, instantly and completely. Yeah, because she's 8 and was about to die. That's not politics, that's just— Luka struggled for words through the medication haze. That's just what you do. In your culture, perhaps. In ours, such an act from an outsider invokes bonds that supersede all other obligations. Torvin pulled out a data pad, showing Luka what appeared to be news feeds. Since the queen knelt, the entire political structure of Aranthe society has entered crisis. Conservative factions demand she abdicate for violating royal protocol. Progressive groups insist you be granted immediate noble status. And everyone, across every spectrum, wants to know what you will ask for. Ask for— Luka's head was starting to pound. I don't want anything. I want to make sure Kiora is okay, and then go back to calculating stress loads on foundation supports. Torvin stared at him. You understand that the queen's gesture means she is bound to honor any request you make. You could ask for wealth beyond measure, political power, changes to law or policy. You could destabilize our entire civilization with a single demand. Or, Luka said slowly, I could ask if Kiora's okay and then drop this whole thing. There is no dropping this. The Sev'rathi, once invoked, cannot be undone. The bond exists now, written into the fabric of our social order by the Queen's own action. Torvin's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. You saved a child out of pure instinct, and now you're caught in political machinery you never asked to be part of. Luka closed his eyes, overwhelmed. His back hurt. His arm was in some kind of regenerative cast that hummed against his skin. And apparently he'd accidentally become a walking constitutional crisis by doing something any decent person would do. Can I at least see her? He asked. Kiora, I just want to know she's really okay. Torvin stood. I'll ask. Though I should warn you, any interaction with the royal family now carries political weight. Even asking about her well-being will be analyzed and interpreted. Let them analyze, Luka muttered. I'm an engineer. I'm used to people overthinking things. They released Luka from the medical facility 2 weeks later, still in a mobility brace that helped his healing spine, and with enough medications to stock a small pharmacy. His company had given him indefinite medical leave. Enthusiastically, since apparently having an employee who'd invoked the Sev'rathi with the Queen was either fantastic publicity or a diplomatic nightmare, depending on who you asked. Queen Seravine requested a private audience the day he was cleared for visitors. Luka navigated the palace corridors with the help of a floating assistance platform, following a silent guard who looked like he wasn't sure if he should be honored or terrified to be escorting someone the Queen had knelt before. The private audience chamber was smaller than Luka expected, with walls of polished wood and windows overlooking the palace gardens. Queen Seravine stood by the windows, still wearing her formal robes but without the crown. She looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying the weight of civilization on her shoulders. Behind her robes, barely visible, Kiora peeked out. When she saw Luka, her eyes widened. Luka Voss, Seravine said formally. I owe you thanks beyond what language can express. How about just thanks and we call it even? Luka maneuvered his platform closer. Is Kiora okay? I've been asking, but everyone keeps giving me political answers. Kiora emerged fully from behind her mother, a small bandage on her forehead the only visible sign of the incident. I'm okay. You saved me. Yeah, well. Luka felt awkward under their combined attention. Couldn't let you get crushed by rocks. That would have been bad engineering on multiple levels. Seravine made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. She crossed the room and, to Luka's surprise, sat in the chair across from his platform, not on her throne or standing in formal posture, but sitting like a normal person. "I need to explain something," she said. "When I knelt, I wasn't following protocol or making a political calculation. I saw you lying there, having placed your body between death and my daughter, and something older than law or duty took over. In that moment, you weren't human or foreign or a variable in diplomatic relations. You were someone who valued her life over your own, and that demanded I acknowledge it." "You didn't have to kneel," Luka said. "I did. Not because of protocol, but because anything less would have been a lie." Seravine looked at him steadily. "Now, my people demand I honor the bond properly. You have the right to ask anything of me. So I'll ask you directly, without politics or ceremony. What do you want, Luka Voss?" Luka thought about it. He thought about the conservative factions and progressive groups, about political power and wealth, and all the things Torvin had listed. He thought about his apartment back on Earth, his sister who worried about him, his niece who sent him letters with backwards letters and questions about space. "Can Kiora write me letters sometimes?" he asked. "I have a niece around her age, and I miss getting kid letters. They ask weird questions and don't care about proper formatting. It's nice." The silence that followed was so complete Luka wondered if his translation implant had malfunctioned. Then Seravine laughed, actually laughed, a sound so unexpected that Kiora giggled too. The queen put her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with either laughter or tears or both. "Letters," she said finally. "You could ask for anything in my power to give, and you want my daughter to write you letters. Is that okay?" Luka asked, suddenly worried he'd committed another cultural blunder. "It's perfect." Seravine lowered her hands and her eyes were bright. "Do you understand what you've just done? By asking for something so small, something so purely personal, you've shown that the Sev'rathi isn't transactional for you. You didn't save Kiora for political gain. You did it because she's a kid and was in danger," Luka finished. "I mean, obviously." "Obviously," Seravine echoed softly. "And by asking for letters instead of power, you've given me a gift. You've proven that the bond we share isn't about debt or obligation. It's about—" She paused, searching for words. "People caring about people," Luka offered. "Yes." Seravine stood and, in a gesture that made her daughter beam, performed a small, informal bow. "You may have your letters, Luka Voss, and if you're willing, perhaps you'll visit sometimes. Kiora should know the person who valued her life enough to risk his own." Kiora stepped forward, suddenly shy. "Can I write you about the birds in the garden? We have these little blue ones that make nests in the fountain, and they're really funny." "I would love to hear about funny birds," Luka said seriously. Over the following weeks, as Luka recovered and returned to his engineering work, he found himself becoming an unexpected fixture in the palace. Not as a noble or advisor or political asset, but as the guy who made Kiora laugh by pointing out structural problems in the throne room, and made the queen relax by treating her like a normal person instead of divine authority. The letters from Kiora arrived weekly, full of observations about birds and questions about Earth and increasingly confident drawings. Luka answered every one, sometimes from his apartment, sometimes from construction sites, once from a hospital bed when he stupidly tried to lift something too heavy and re-injured his back. The political crisis gradually resolved itself. The conservatives couldn't argue against someone who wanted nothing. The progressives couldn't weaponize someone who refused power. And Luka just kept showing up, kept writing letters, kept being someone who'd made a choice in a moment of crisis, and refused to make it complicated afterward. 6 months after the incident, he visited the palace for dinner. Seravine was in the garden with Kiora, both of them kneeling in the dirt planting seeds for the spring bloom. Not the formal kneel of the Sev'rathi, but the practical kneel of people with gardening to do. "Your retaining wall is failing," Luka called from the path, pointing to the eastern garden wall. "See that crack? You've got maybe 2 months before it needs emergency repair." "Make a note, Kiora," Seravine said, not looking up from her planting. "Remind me to have the engineers inspect the eastern wall." "Or you could just let Luka fix it," Kiora said. "He's better at walls than the palace engineers." "I design them, I don't build them," Luka protested, but he was already pulling out his portable scanner to assess the damage. They worked in the garden until sunset. A queen, a princess, and an engineer who'd accidentally proved that some bonds exist above law, above rank, above even thrones. Not because of debt or obligation or political necessity, but because sometimes people choose to protect what's precious, and that choice changes everything. Kiora's letters kept coming. Luka kept answering. And sometimes, when he visited the palace, Seravine would kneel in the garden dirt beside him, both of them existing in a space where crowns and titles mattered less than the simple decision to value a child's life over your own safety. The Sev'rathi remained, written into Aranthi law and custom. But between them, it had become something quieter and stranger, a friendship built on the foundation of one split-second choice and sustained by the ongoing decision to keep showing up, keep caring, keep being people who protected what mattered. Luka